Hi there. Would you love to learn how to draft, cut and sew this off-shoulder puff-sleeved Victorian corset with back spikes and modesty panel? If yes, then do stick and stay and let's do it together. It doesn't matter if you are a beginner or a professional. Let's get started. Before we'll be able to do this beautiful style, we first would have to draft our basic bodice. This is our front pattern and that is our back pattern. In case you would want to learn how we drafted this, I'll put the link in the description box so you could check it out. We will start by modifying our front pattern, then to the back. The basic bodice extends only to the waist, and so from the shoulder to waist, we move 8 inches to give us our shoulder to hip line. On our hip line, we will divide the hip measurement by 4 and add 2 inches seam allowance, since we had added 2 inches seam allowance to the basic bodice. Our model's hip measurement is 46. Divided by 4 gives us 11.5 plus 2 inches. Then we draw a line to connect this to that. We mark the nipple to nipple measurement we have here, which had been divided by 2, the same thing on our hip line. Then we connect these 2 dot lines to the new point. From the nipple point, you move upwards by 4.5 inches. This is a distance that covers the client's bust as she wants. If you want yours to be a bit shorter, you can. And if you want it to be a bit longer, you decide. We are to widen this dart to equal to the underbust that we have here. And so we first measure the distance from this to that dart. That is the dart interval on where we marked our 4.5. And then see what we get. We subtract it from this and then we divide the remainder by 2 among the left and the right side of our dart. And so measuring this, I get 1 inch. 1 inch minus the 2 inches is giving me 1 inch, meaning we need to distribute it by half on this side and half on the other side to be able to get a full distance of 2 inches, just as we had here. We draw a line to connect these 2 points to where the shoulder dart ended. Because this has a straight neckline and not a sweetheart neckline, we will draw a line which is perpendicular to the center front line to touch the point we have here. Next, we connect this point also to the armhole using an S-like shape. From the shoulder to nipple line, we would mark half of our nipple to nipple measurement, starting from this nipple point towards the side seam. And so our nipple to nipple was 8 divided by 2 give us 4. And so we are doing 4, starting from here towards the side seam. On our shoulder to waist line, we would move 2 inches from the second dart towards the side seam. Then we draw a line which touches both this point and that point and moves all the way to touch the hip line and also goes up to touch the armhole line. Then we mark half of an inch away from this very line we drew on the shoulder to waist line. Then we draw a line from this point connecting to the half mark we marked here and also to meet the hip line on the same point. On the side seam, from the shoulder to waist downward, we would mark 3 inches. And at the center front, from the shoulder to waist downward, we mark 6 inches. Then we take off our seam allowance from this side. The seam allowance was 2 inches, and so we take that out. Before the folding, we first would have to cut the base. To prevent the lower section of our Victorian corset from being opened, we would have to tighten the dart just a little bit. And so we'll be taking 1/4 inch from this side, 1/4 inch from the other side, and on this second dart, we'll be taking 1/2 inch. We connect these darts to their corresponding dart lines. Then we fold the new lines we've just drawn, and then we refine the base. From this dart, we are moving 1 inch, and from the center front here too, we are moving 1 inch, and we'll connect these 2 points. This is serving as another bone channel. We'll connect the shoulder dart also to the nipple to nipple dart point. Now we go ahead and label this. I do these arrows to demonstrate to you that this is heading towards the top. Now we can go ahead and cut out the pieces. And so these are our front pieces. We will elongate the center back line and also mark 8 inches from the shoulder to waist to our hip line. On the hip line, we divide our hip measurement by 4 and we add our seam allowance. Since the basic bodice had 2 inches seam allowance, we'll add 2 inches to it. The hip is 46 divided by 4 gives us 11.5, and we add 2 inches to it. Then the nipple to nipple measurement, which we had transferred to the back and then added 1/4 inch to it, we'll do the same thing to the hip line. Then we connect these 2 dart lines to that very point. We will take off our seam allowance and then divide the distance from this to the dart line, and then we locate the midpoint. We do same for the waistline. Then we draw a line to connect these 2 points and extend further to touch the hip line. On the waistline, we take off 1/2 inch as an additional dart. And then we draw a line from this point to the half mark we just marked, also to the hip line. Then on the side seam, we are taking off 3 inches just as we did for the front. But at the center back, we are moving downwards by 6 inches. Then on the side seam, we take off our 2 inches seam allowance. We are going ahead to fold this that onto this that onto that, but then we first would have to cut off the hip line. We will then label this as 5, 6, and then 7. And we'll go ahead and cut. These are our back parting pieces. Let's look at how we added our seam allowances to the various parting pieces. For number 1, the center front, as we said, was on fold, and so it has been opened. That's why you see the violin there. And so it has also been used to cut the violin and the fashion fabric itself. Number 2 has the seam allowance on both the left and the right hand sides. On the top and the down part, there's no allowance. Number 3 to the same thing. Allowance is added on both left and right. When it comes to number 4, allowance is added only to the part that attaches itself to the number 3. When it comes to number 5, there's no allowance on the left side that attaches itself to number 4. But then, the allowance is rather added on the side that attaches itself to number 6. Number 6 has allowance on both the left and the right hand side. And number 7 also have allowance on the left side where it touches number 6. For all of these, there's no allowance on the top, neither do you have any allowance beneath. Then, we're going to join all the pieces together. Number 1, 2, and 3, and 4 are going to be added, and then 5, 6, and 7 will be added separately. All these for both the lining and the fashion fabrics themselves. These are the pieces as we have stitched them together. The fashion fabric itself, this is the front, and these are the back patterns. You would also see that we have stitched the same thing with the lining, and it's very, very structured. And so we'll go ahead and on each of these seam lines we see here, we are going to fix our bones. All we do is to measure the distance from the top here to the bottom. Then whatever we get, we subtract about 1 inch from it. And so we place it on, leaving a bit of allowance on the top here. And then by the time we are done stitching, we would also leave a bit of allowance down there, so that when we are sewing to turn it to the good side, we wouldn't stitch on the bone to make the turning difficult. That's how come we leave the allowance on both the top and the bottom of our boning channels. Bear in mind also that the center front here is also going to get a bone. Just that because it was cut on fold, you don't see any line there. But then we'll draw a line here, and then we put a bone there as well. We'll go and do this and come back to continue. And so these are our bones neatly stitched onto our lining. We've also done same for the back patterns. The next step would be to fix our bias onto the channels that we have for the fashion fabric itself. And so these are the lines. We're going to stitch our bias onto those boning channel lines. This is decorative, and it makes it look as though this is where we fixed the bones. So we're going to sew this onto all the channels. We are back with our bias neatly stitched on our boning channels. What you're going to do right now would be to put this and the lining good size together, where we match the various stitches against another. We move on to our machine and stitch the top here. We do same for the other part as well. This is what we have after stitching the two together. The next step would be to pick the back pattern, flip it to the good side, that is good sides together, and then we stitch the center back. This will afford us the opportunity to fix our eyelet and also to be able to lace the dress. After stitching it, we flip it to the good side. Because we are going to pipe the base, it is appropriate to pull this so that the two are together. We go and stitch it to secure it before we pipe the base. We'll repeat same for the other side of the back pattern. When it comes to the front, we're also going to pull this so that the two are on the same line. We'll go ahead and use our basting stitches to just secure the edges before we come and then pipe the base. Our stitches are neatly done and the two are secured. What we are going to do next would be to pipe the base or the hemline. And so we're just going to stitch it on the wrong side at the very edge. We just stitch this throughout. And after that, we will flip it to the good side and then top stitch on the good side. And so we'll go and do that for both the front and the back pattern pieces. Now that our hem is neatly finished, we'll go ahead and run overlock stitches on the rough edges. We are now to take off our seam allowances. Since we had added 2 inches as seam allowance, all we need to do is to take off the 2 inches all the way through. So we're going ahead to stitch this. Then after that, we fix our eyelets. Our eyelet is fixed. Next is to sew our modesty panel. So what you are doing is that we want the modesty panel to start from the top here and extend to about 9 inches. That is, it should be around this area. And so we'll cut a violin of 5 inches by 9 inches. Then we'll wrap our fashion fabric all around this. And so this is what we have. We'll turn it to the other side like this. And we'll flip this onto the other one. We'll then go ahead and stitch the base and the top here. Then, after we are done sewing, we'll cut off the edges and we'll turn it to the good side. Okay, so because there's an opening here, we'll go ahead and stitch this. We're going to place it under one of these and then we stitch. What we are doing is that we want it to exceed where the eyelets are placed. And so from the tip to where the eyelet is about 1.5 inches. And so we are doing 2 inches. Right, so it's on the 2 inches that we are going to fix our modesty panel. making sure that it doesn't exceed this line. Now with this, we'll go ahead and stitch it on, just one side of it. Our sleeve is cut with our sleeve measurement, where we have our sleeve length and then our bicep and then our calf. What we do is that we add about 16 or more inches to it, depending on how big you want the sleeve to be. After that, the edges is folded to create a casing for it. And so we create that casing where we would insert our elastic. That is what we do with the cap and then also the calf. And so right now we're going to stitch the calf and then we'll also stitch the calf. We're going to do this and then we'll come back to continue. After stitching our calf and then our cap, we insert our elastic. The calf area has an elastic with a length of about 12 inches and the calf would also use about 10 inches. And so we're just going to insert the two. After inserting the elastic into the calf and the cap, what you do is that we'll go ahead and stitch the edges to secure it. And then we do a bit of top stitching also on it so that the elastic does not move about. And it's also decorative. This is the sleeve after we have gathered both the cap and the calf. What you're going to do next would be to turn it to the wrong side and then we'll go take off the seam allowance. Repeat the same thing for the other sleeve. After completing the sleeve, what you do next would be to match the center piece to that of the side seam. After that, we work it out till we get to about 5 inches on the top here, and then we do 3 inches at the back. And so we just pin it down and then go ahead and stitch. We're just attaching about 8 inches length at the armhole.